What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and I am joined by a friend of the show and coming back, recent participant in the Batman retrospective, Mike Burton. How are you doing, Mike? You okay?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It was my birthday the day before recording this, so that was fun. Had a day off work, and I just drank cider and read Star Wars comics like all day. I played some video games, and then my mum popped around and gave me this hoodie that I'm wearing that your listeners can't see. And then Meg got home. We had a cinnamon roll that she made that was absolutely lush. So I had to go back to work today. Still lockdown life work, but it's cool. It was fun yesterday. Because I just, with all the comics and things I read, I've got work comics and fun comics, and the work comics are the ones I'm reading for at the podcast at the time. And obviously I'm going through everything. So where I am now is about 3 years behind in a lot of the main series. So it's really strange because yesterday I was reading all the newest episodes, all the newest issues of the main run of Star Wars, which is set between episodes 5 and 6. While on my podcast, I've just been reading an arc set between episodes 4 and 5, and I reread the comics for this one. So I'm just reading just bits and pieces of Star Wars comics from everywhere. But I've caught up with all the new ones that have been out the last month or so. So I'm all caught up in that way.
Sounds like, living life like a boss. So that's it. On a day off, that's how you want to do it. Drinking cider and drinking comics. That's the way to live it. That is. You're here talking about comics. You're here to do Desert Island Comics. You asked the question: 3 comics that you would take onto Desert Island, and you made your choices. So let's just quickly comment. They're all Star Wars comics, so it is a Star Wars special edition show. You chose Star Wars, C-3PO, and the story is called Phantom Limb. I'd heard of this story, but had never read it until this point. And then 2 issues of the Charles Soule Darth Vader, and issues 5 and 25, which again, just sort of to give a little nod, sort of they're brief reads, but there's a lot in them.
Yeah, all of them are. It's for very different reasons. It was one of those things where when I was trying to think of which Star Wars comic, because when you asked me about sort of Desert Island comics and things, I was thinking, and I was like, in all honesty, I don't think I've really read any decent one-shots from anything that aren't Star Wars. And then most of the Marvel, DC, or other things that I've read, like I'm currently partway through book 3 of Miracle Man now, after Steve recommended it so much. So I've finished book 1, finished book 2, and book 2 was phenomenal, and now I'm on book 3 and I'm a couple in. And it's like, with Miracle Man, if you said what would I want to take, I'd say probably the whole Miracle Man collection, because I feel like I could just constantly read it. But the problem is that that's about 20 or something comics or along those lines. So it's like, choose one of them. It's like, but with really big stories, it's just, there's certain moments that are really cool, but for rereadability and things, they don't necessarily, without a connecting universe to be able to tap into.
It's a hard one, that is, because I love Miracle Man. I think it's one of my favourite Alan Moore's. I could tell you, like you said, my favourite issue, but like you say, it would make no sense without the context of the rest of the story. I don't even think you've got. I don't know if you've seen ahead, but obviously, you've met Kid Miracle Man.
Yes, I've just met Miracle Woman for context, so I'm about 2 issues into book 3. I'm not going to spoil anything. So you don't know anything about what's going to happen. No, I've managed to go into this completely, apart from listening to the Superheroes for Dummies episode about Miracle Man, where Steve specifically didn't spoil it because he wanted Dan and Paul to read them. Aside from that, no, I don't know anything. I'm in line to buy the Golden Age Neil Gaiman batch.
Love that. That's as well. That is like a series of one shots, and there's an issue in that I return to regularly, like at least once a year, that I absolutely adore. And so yeah, and obviously Gaiman has. I met with what's it, Robertson? I forget his bloody name now. The guy who's doing the art.
You just said it wasn't Craig. Gareth. No, you said it.
Yeah.
Before we press recording.
It's good. It's really Robinson, but he does like Fables and a bunch of stuff. Great artist, great guy. I interviewed him last year, the year before, and he's been doing the art for the next 6 issues. So Gaiman's written them. They've got 12 issues. He's been doing the art. So I'm so excited for that.
It's the Silver Age, isn't it?
Yeah, Silver Age is going to continue through. So very excited. But I won't spoil the end of book 3 because it gets crazy. It's immense.
I've heard it's good, but yeah, because of Miracle Man and some of the other stuff I've read, like I've read quite a few of the big Spider-Man and Batman comics as well. Like I've been getting into them, but it's also like, the last issue of Batman Hush. It's just like, well, all of the things that happen in that don't mean anything if you haven't read the prior comics.
Exactly.
So yeah, it was quite a hard one because, as I said, I've just read kind of blocks of. I've got like whole stories, so I was like, because I've just read relatively every canon Marvel Star Wars comic, I thought that's probably the best pool to go into. It just kind of like puts the blinkers on a little bit rather than getting like analysis paralysis of just staring at every comic like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah. But these are good choices. It's a good pool to go because we haven't really had anything from this before, so I'm glad I got to read these. Just quickly stepping back, when you have read Miracle Man book 3, just go into just to pop my own back catalogue. There is an episode, I'm not sure if it's a 1-parter or a 2-parter, but it's me and Julian, co-host from Stories at Time and Space, discussing the whole of Miracle Man. And
nice.
We get into some real in-depth stuff. So go check that out, ladies and gentlemen, if you love Miracle Man. Anyway, let's talk Star Wars. So the first issue, I'll be doing this in publication order, is C3PO, Phantom Limb. So, first, before we get into the comic, explain, because I always have this nitpick with you, explain to people why this comic exists.
Well, the reason this comic exists, for blunt reasons, is that Star Wars films often leave in plot holes or lots of chunks of information that don't really get explained very much. And when they make the films, they don't think about it that much. And then when the film comes out, the question that is asked constantly is things like, how does C-3PO get the red arm in The Force Awakens? You made quite a big deal about that, then never mentioned it. Why is it that, this happens? Why is it that happens? And, as much to many people's chagrin, but I enjoy it. The problem is with Star Wars, it was one of my favorite things, which is a lot of the expanded content, so the series, the books, and the comics, a lot of them just answer questions or plot holes from the films. I mean, a good example is Rogue One is arguably one of the best Star Wars films, if not the best in at least recent years. Yeah. And that film, plot-wise, is maybe the weakest on the basis that it's just a plot hole for A New Hope. They went, how have you got a moon-sized battle station that's been in production for 20 years? How did one bloke with a missile shoot it? And then they were like, it's a very good point. And then after, Family Guy and what was it, Robot Chicken, everyone basically parodied it for decades. They went, here's your answer. It's probably like the least thought out film of the 5 new ones, and yet the best made, which is quite baffling. But
it's a movie mic drop, isn't it? It is. It's sort of walking on and going, bump, there you go. There's your answer in your face. So
yeah, exactly. so this one more sort of tuned in. This one is specifically about how 3PO got his red arm. And what's funny is I first heard about this before I got into the Star Wars comics. In the Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens video game, there's some downloadable content for a bonus mission. I think it might be a free bonus mission, but it's a bonus mission called The Phantom Limb, and it's how 3PO got his red arm. And it's an adaptation of this comic. And I remember, so it's really random that basically, I think this comic, I've got some notes here of when it came out, because it came out April 2016 and Force Awakens was December 2015, I think. And so it was meant to come out in the Journey 2, but there's lots of delays with it. It was meant to come out with all new Star Wars films, they do a Journey 2, blah, blah, blah. And they normally release like a couple of books, a couple of comics, and then some random other thing. Yeah. And this was meant to be part of it. But because there were so many delays and things, it actually got released quite long after it was meant to. So I have a feeling what would have been good, this would have been genius, is if they'd have released it at the right time and given it like everyone who went to see Force Awakens opening night, if they'd have done something like that, genius, because they did that with Venom, I went and saw that, which is a film that a lot of people don't like. I enjoyed. I thought it wasn't as good as it could have been, but yeah, exactly. It was like fairly inoffensively okay. But I went and saw that, and I got a one-shot comic about Venom when I went, just for going so early. And I feel like this would have been the perfect opportunity to jump on that. And I just don't understand why they haven't, because in this you can get it as a standalone copy, which I do not have, but I've got the copy of it in. There's a mini series called Shattered Empire, and it's set within hours of the end of Return of the Jedi. It's pretty good. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good. And in the hardcover version of that, this comic is in there, but in the normal trade paperback, it's not. So when I was updating my Star Wars comics collection, when there was basically, I had the majority of them, but there were a few holes of comics I hadn't heard of. When I made a big list when I started on my podcast, and this was one of them, and I was like, wait, and I looked into it, and I was like, wait a minute, this is the story from the Lego game that I know about. I was like, what? And this is much more adult, because the Lego game is like, what's it called? Like canon adjacent. Like the events that happen are generally canon. Like the holiday special, for example. It's like, for now, we could all assume Finn became a Jedi, and that's lightly canon. But something could very easily contradict that. But it's kind of like the light version. And so I remember finding this, and I was like, I need to own that. So, I mean, you'll see me on an iPad, because I will gladly say, not a sponsor, it'd be lovely if it was, Marvel Unlimited. Oh, yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, so on Marvel Unlimited, it's excellent. I'm on there, and it's just because it's in my comic bin, and it's got loads of stuff in it. I was like, I can't be bothered to take that out. So I've been going through all my comics. I've got loads of sleeves and backing boards and stuff that I've been doing. So lots of fun there. But yeah, I've got it on Marvel Unlimited. But yeah, because you said you hadn't read this one, had you?
I hadn't. No, I didn't. It is one of those, like I say, it's an interesting situation, because I remember when the posters came out for Force Awakens, and there was all the hype, and as you sort of alluded to, C-3PO stood out because of this red arm, and it was on the poster. It wasn't overly prominent, but it was clearly there. And I remember there was sort of like, I mean, it wasn't like Mephisto levels of speculation, but there was all this speculation of like, what's this red arm mean? Is it something alluding to in the film? Blah, blah, blah. And it never really came to anything. But it was clearly one of those things that, like you say, fans hooked onto. And I'd heard about this and heard actually it was quite a good comic as like a one shot. And I'd never got around to reading it. I'm glad I have, actually, because the story is interesting. You said something off air, which is very true, though. I wish we had this version of C-3PO in the films,
especially Rise of Skywalker. That's my biggest. I will say that Rise of Skywalker C-3PO is probably the funniest C-3PO in, I would argue, any of the films, because he's got so many funny lines. But the problem is just that, I like all Star Wars films, including the sequel trilogy, and I think Rise of Skywalker is probably still better than Phantom Menace. Although I do like Phantom Menace, and I know that we obviously had that Comics and Trial episode where I was defending it with the skin on my teeth. But Rise of Skywalker was, for me, one of the weakest films plot-wise. And one of the things that frustrated me is there's just loads of random little pitfalls of things, which just seem to be, this is a concluding saga of a 9, arguably 11 film saga that's been ongoing for 40 plus years. And by the end of it, you've got more questions than you had answers. And that pissed me off more than anything. I was like, this is meant to be a full stop. Not, well, in 20 years' time, when Disney basically say, surprise, Skywalker episode 10. So we all know that's going to happen, but you should have pretended.
Close the story off, please, at least. Yeah. Exactly.
And in that, they just didn't. They kept doing all these pointless loose ends. Like, oh, C-3PO, he could read Sith language, but he's not going to because his program forbids it. Oh, so we're going to wipe his memory. Oh, we're going to bring it back right at the end. Why are you wasting so much time?
We'll get to because it made me think of that as well, actually. Because this book brings up this thing of memory wiping.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah, and it's loaded with Easter eggs. It's that I know what he's talking about kind of thing. But more than that, like it says so much more about the experience of being a droid in the Star Wars universe is, for want of a better phrase, pretty shit. Like this, it really is not a fun existence. No. I was reading this like, this is a cherry little jaunt, sort of all this stuff's going on. This is a bit of adventure. 2/3 of the way through, you're like, oh no, this is a really, wow, this is getting into some real like deep like discussion around the sort of what really is sentience in a droid, and what right do we have to wipe their memory? And I'm like, wow, yeah, this turned left pretty quick.
I thought you'd enjoy it when I was thinking about
great.
Yeah, when I was thinking about these, after I kind of sifted through my collection in a way and was kind of thinking of, I thought I definitely want to do these 2 Darth Vader comics, and I was trying to think of the third, and I was like, but none of the one shots that I've read, they're all like, there's one where you have Cassian meet K2SO from Rogue One, and it's just so bland and uninteresting. It's just like, ugh. And you've got a couple others that are quite cool. Beckett's one's quite good actually, but once again, there's just the problem I have with a lot of one shots is I know Desert Island Comics is not meant to be just one shots, but when it's a one-off issue, it's hard to not choose ones that don't connect and things. And it's just like there are so many of them that are just okay, and it's like I wouldn't. The Beckett one's cool, but I wouldn't want to be stuck on a desert island with just the Beckett comic. I could bloody mental.
Yeah.
This one, I feel like you can delve into this. Probably, I feel like you could almost do, you get those podcasts that are like Star Wars Minute, and it goes for like a minute of every. I feel like you could do this, but almost 3p a page, and you could almost do it where each page you could probably have a good 15 to maybe half an hour breakdown discussion on each page, because as you say, there's certain parts and you read it, you just go, Jesus, this is a Star Wars comic that kids could read. And some of the stuff that gets brought up in it is there's loads of layers of it. There's obviously, as you say, the sentience or the consciousness of a droid. You've got the mind wipes. You've got their role, not only because the rebels are the people who treat it in... When this is set, this is actually set a couple years before The Force Awakens. So at some point before The Force Awakens. And it's like, at this point, the baddies have gone, in air quotes, the First Order's slowly rising, but they're basically gone. And it's like, the good guys are the ones who treat the droids the best. But even they don't treat them well. They treat them like pets at the best. Everyone hates C-3PO because he's annoying as all hell, which is true. But the thing is that he's treated almost like a 5-year-old. By everyone, even people who like him. And you just think, God, could you imagine being as old as him and just being basically bossed around because at a flick of a button, people could just hold you down and wipe your mind? Whereas obviously the Imperials and stuff are very cruel to their droids, and that gets tackled a bit in Star Wars Rebels. But even you either basically get completely abused or treated like a 5-year-old, and you're completely disposable as well. So it is this quite wretched existence, really.
That's one of the things. Yeah, it is. Like people... or the human element, or whatever you say, of the Star Wars universe, like really looks down on the droids, and it's a bit of a running joke, isn't it, within the Star Wars universe, sort of thing. Your bag of bolts and all this other stuff. But one of the things that this book does, and we're going to credit the writer for this as well, is it's almost like I can think of it like the Dirty Dozen or the Magnificent Seven or something like that. This is where like there's just a band of droids and they've got a mission. Like they've crashed on a planet and they've got to get to this beacon so that they can be collected, because they have this prisoner droid, Omer or whatever. It's a female droid that, if gender, it can be ascribed to a droid. But then they give this sort of register, and it goes through, and like C-3PO is basically justifying why he should be in charge. And all the others are going like, well, there's a security droid, there's a construction droid, there's this and that. And at first you are like, there's a medical droid. Like, so it literally feels like, I've seen every film where you get the sort of the band of the ragtag band of soldiers together, and you've got like, well, here's the drunk medic, and here's the explosives expert with like 2 fingers, whatever it is. That's how this feels. But then they all justify their role in the team. And there's this sense of duty that comes with this book as well. Like, no, we are doing this because we are part of the Rebel Alliance and we have got a duty to do. And I'm like, Jesus, like, yeah, even these are droids. Like, they acknowledge this level of programming, and then they obviously talk about sentience. But like all the robots in this, all the droids in this, there's sacrifice. There's, like it's really sort of quite an interesting book to be like. I mean, James Robinson, who's written some great stuff in the past. But like, yeah, in this, he's really like, I want to see this. If Droids, the cartoon, had been this, like, or like some weird Japanese anime that did this, I'd be all over that. It'd be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, what's funny about that is obviously, because you're talking about the really old school Droids cartoon,
Yeah,
aren't you?
yeah.
That is. I've only seen a couple episodes of that. But that is rough viewing.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Even the look of 3PO looks nothing like C-3PO anyway. It looks like the concept art from Ralph McQuarrie. They were like, hey, let's make this before Star Wars is a thing.
Yeah.
And there's a little Easter egg about Ralph McQuarrie in this as well, actually, which I'll point out in a bit. But my point, I had a point there. It was a build up to something, and I've completely lost it. So there you go. Continue with what you were saying.
We'll see if we come around to it. No, but I was saying about this thing about sacrifice. Like they go through these trials and tribulations, and you see this band gets taken apart, and you know the security droid sacrifices himself so they can get away at the base of a cliff. The construction droid puts himself across a bridge and then sinks, unable to save them. And it's constantly this idea of they're doing this to reach this end goal because they've got to get this information to the Rebel Alliance. And it's to save Admiral Akbar, which, by the way, I love the fact that like Admiral Akbar's been taken hostage, and that's the least important thing in this book. But no, I was just really impressed. I was like, this is a really good book. I mean, I'm actually doing a lot of research around robotics and stuff at the moment for something I'm writing. And I was reading this, and this idea of like sentience and emotion. Like the end of the book, like he attaches this red arm, which comes from. Well, I don't know if we are going to spoil these books. Go and read it, even if you know.
It's a one shot.
Yeah. Omer, the prisoner, basically gives up the information and sacrifices itself to save C-3PO. And then he wears or utilizes the arm after losing his arm. But it's the final shot. It's him. It says he sort of they make this. BB-8 makes a comment about the arm. It's a beep and a boop. But and then C-3PO says, "Oh, well, I'm just going to wear it for a while just to remember." And there's this notion of like, emotion and grief, even just in that moment. But what I thought was more interesting, and again, I could be massively reading into this. He's looking into a window, and you've got this reflection coming back, and it's all the droids that were sacrificed in this mission. But they're all blue, and to me, they look like Force ghosts. And that's not just
the intention.
They're not. I'm not saying that they are Force ghosts and they're there, but it's in a Star Wars universe. It leans towards the good, doesn't it? Like they were sacrificed for the good cause. And I was like, Jesus, this is this notion of now of like souls and afterlife, and I was like, oh man, this is leading me down some path. I'm so glad I'm not smoking anything reading this, because it's
that could be the conversation starter. If it's a late night around a fire with a few fun things to smoke, and then you'd be chatting about this with your mates till God knows what time in the morning. But I was going to say the thing I remembered was actually there's the two of the upcoming series for Disney Plus. One is called Droids, and one is called Visions. Droids, we don't know anything about. It's basically going to be, they say, utilizing brand new technology in some manner to create a all new story about droids, and it's going to be half hosted by 3PO and R2D2, and I'd probably BB-8 would be in it, but it's a brand new droid is the main focus, and it's just about droids. And I don't have overly high hopes for that, because I feel like they're going to aim way too much to the kids and not get into the details I want. I want more about like L337 from Solo: A Star Wars Story, which is her whole idea of like she's fighting for this, she's always fighting for the cause. She wants droid rights, and then her ultimate goal, which is actually a punishment really, is her consciousness gets put into the Millennium Falcon forever, and she's stuck in the Millennium Falcon, being their slave, worse than probably death. It's like, when you think of it like that, it doesn't sound too happy. But
you used a word. You used a word there. You referred to it as a consciousness, not a programming, not her. And again, it comes back to this idea of sentience. Like the droids in this have got agency and make decisions and stuff. I just find that all fascinating. That like they are true characters.
Yeah, exactly. And it is. They've. The writer, which you said was James Robinson, the funny thing is the art is all done by a gentleman called Tony Harris as well. Because often, a lot of the time, I'm sure you're aware, is there's often a penciler and an inker. Sometimes it's just one, but then there's also normally a colorist or color artist as well. And then, people who do the dialogue, the letterers and things. But I think this was basically pretty much all him, that guy, Tony Harris, which, the artwork in this the art is quite... With Star Wars comics, I find that a lot of the time, with the big selling ones like the Darth Vader comics, things like that, the artwork is on point, the storytelling is on point. But when you get to the more B stories, normally one or the other is a little bit weaker than the other. But I find that this one is really, really up there. And I remember what I was going to say. Visions, the other Disney Plus thing, that is going to be Japanese animation for Star Wars stories.
Yes.
And apparently it's looking at them in a new lens, and what I'm hoping is stories like this are going to get made into, not I want new content because I was going to be bored, but like I'd really want this story, if they made this into like a manga or anime rather, and it wasn't over the top filled up with all of the tropes of anime, because I do like some anime, but if it wasn't over the top anime, it was just Japanese animation and almost done to the page. I think this could be like a game changer for how Star Wars view droids, because I want there to be a big droid subplot somewhere, even if it's in a comic. I would love to get into the nitty gritty, the term Megan hates, the depth into, as you say, like sentience, or is it consciousness? Is it, how do droids cope with it? Do you have droids with PTSD? Because one of the things that you touched upon when we discussed this earlier is there's a point in the book, in the comic specifically, where 3PO, well, there's a couple times, but 3PO and Omri are talking and whatnot, and they talk about having their memories wiped. And one of the points in it, it's got 3PO talking about his memory wiped, and he said he can see like flashes and things, and he remembers, it's like a planet full of fire and and it's one of them's referencing Naboo. It was actually the prequel saga, because what happened is, for a lot of people who may not be aware, in Revenge of the Sith, 3PO gets his mind wiped by Bail Organa. Right at the very end, he says, "I'll get this protocol droid's mind wiped," and then R2 lets out this funny little beep, like, "Go ahead, mate." And obviously then when he sees Obi-Wan and stuff, R2 recognizes Obi-Wan, but 3PO doesn't, and things. And it's like, when they do the flashbacks, I'm trying to see, because the artwork for this is absolutely brilliant.
It is. I love it.
It's the panel work is so interesting. I love it when they do different things. But he says, "I see flashes for just a moment of places. Rocks, a factory of droids, an arena in the middle of a battle. My body, not my own," which is obviously Attack of the Clones. "A green world of hills, underwater cities," Phantom Menace. And then a single city spread as far as my optical sensors could see, with the temple on fire, which is obviously when Anakin attacks the Jedi Temple. And you're thinking, having PTSD is probably the most horrendous things to happen in Star Wars in a long time. And he says that, "I have memories too, and yes, sometimes I allow myself to wonder about them, but I also accept it is a droid's lot in life to be in service of its master." And you're like, Jesus Christ.
But yeah, well, this is the thing. It does come to this point. I mean, you could say, if you really want to dig into this, it's a massive plot hole, because he has these memories, but they're not clear. It's not like he's like, "Oh, I know, I remember Anakin, and I remember this, I remember that," because that would really make a mess. But it's almost like it says, it's like flashes. It's like in a moment, there's like just, it's as we all know, when you delete things on your computer, they're not really deleted. They get compressed and they get sort of, pixelated or whatever. It's that thing, isn't it? Like, part of that, you can still tap into that. So he has these things. And as you say, like, to me, but he's got this programming that limits his desire to do anything other than serve. That's his purpose. He has a raison d'etre, and it is to serve. But there's, there is a part of it that's like, well, you've got sentience. And so, a lot of the stories have done, a lot of the comics and things have done stories about robot rebellion, everything, or an AI sort of take everything from the Terminator to
Westworld,
the Matrix.
which is what you're tackling at the moment.
Yeah, Westworld.
I've been loving that, by the way. Your Stories at a Time of Space is great. But
thank you.
It's just quite a good little show. I love Westworld, the series. So yeah, that's what made me think of.
But you're right, these stories, and it always feels like, but within the Star Wars universe, the droids always feel safe. Even when you get, like, what was the one in, like I said, the one in Rogue One?
L337.
Like, basically threatens to kill Jen Erso. Like, she's basically like, "I'm going to blow your head off." And
Rogue One. Yeah, sorry, in Rogue One, it's K2SO. Sorry, I got that.
K2SO.
Yeah.
But like you say, so you have that where they threaten that, but it always feels safe. I don't really ever feel like they're actually going to do it. But this does lift the lid on it a little bit. Where you're like, yeah, there's probably a reason that K2SO is that way about things, And again, it makes you think about the bounty hunter droid in the Mandalorian, and his design. IG-11. Yeah, becoming a protector of Grogu and this other stuff, and it just makes me think about those moments and like, yeah, there's probably a little bit more to that than just like, it's my job. There's a bit more to it than that, and I like that the door has been sort of cracked open that little bit into this notion of what a droid is in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, because they keep sort of dipping their toe in the water and then pulling back, and because they did that with L337, they did it a bit with K2SO. Obviously, this comic goes in quite hard, but once again, this comic is just like it's released quite early on in the new canon. It hasn't, from my knowledge and what I know about people, a lot of people haven't read this, or a lot of people haven't even heard of it. And then you've got the only other thing that's sort of close. There's in the Dr. Aphra comics, there's occasional mentions of droid uprisings and things, but there's the character 000, which is C-3PO if he was a homicidal maniac who liked draining the blood and enjoying torture. And he's one of the best characters in Star Wars. And I'm pretty certain if I was a betting man, I'd bet money that they're going to make some sort of Aphra movie series or something. Because they had all these comics of her, and then they randomly released an audio drama basically summarizing all of the stuff she's done in the Darth Vader comics. And I was like, Star Wars don't like retreading on old ground very much because it's kind of a waste of time. But to do it in a way which is a completely new format is the second audio drama from Star Wars, the first being Dooku Jedi Lost, which is pretty good. Yeah. And it's like, why are they doing that? So I'm hoping we'll get 000 on the big screen and BT1 because
and she's a great character.
Afra's amazing.
I've read all that Kieran Gillen Darth Vader stuff, and I really enjoyed it. So it was and so those characters, Dr. Aphra, like he created her and introduced her, and then she got her own strip, and she's now been really popular. So it wouldn't surprise me if she's one of the next ones to jump to, at least in animation. If you've got things like Visions and other things, like she'll jump to animation at least, possibly first. But that'd be great. Yeah,
I'd like to see that delving into that. Sort of a different view of droids, because at the moment you've just got the battle droids from the prequels that are just mindless evil, air quotes evil, and then you've got all the other ones who are subservient, and then a couple with a bit of flair of personality. But if you got one who's like 000, is actually literally programmed to be evil. The 000 personality matrix is, because they go to the backstory in the Dr. Aphra comics of how he got that, and like one of the main plot lines in the Aphra comics is 000's had his mind wiped, and he's like centuries old. And he's trying to find his first murder. That's what he wants. More than anything in the world, he wants to know what his first ever murder was, which is just like, that's such a cool plot line for a homicidal robot that one would not really, well, someone like me, as a simpleton, wouldn't really think of. So, I just think it's annoying this came out in 2016, because I'm just like, if this came out now, I'd be like, this is a game changer. They're pointing, they're going to go through the droid stuff. But because it came out right at the start, you're just like, this probably came out and a lot of people don't really know about it, which is quite sad.
You get the feeling I will definitely say it's sad that people don't know about it. I think it's one of those ones to explore. Go and explore this comic, because it's a one shot. You don't need to invest loads of time. It's like 23 pages. It's just a well-told short story. It's not even important that it relates to the red arm that he wears in Force Awakens. Like it's irrelevant. It answers, it retrospectively answers that question. But reading this comic, one of the things that when we did we've talked about Star Wars a number of times, especially the prequels and stuff. And one of the things I hate about prequels is where they try to answer every question. Solo is the worst for it, because it literally has.
When you told me about Solo, it cracks me up. When you told me that, I'd never put all those pieces together. Yeah. But now that I tell people all the time that you said, because it's just so funny what you said. What it like they've got the blaster, the name, his whole story, the Millennium Falcon, how he met Lando, how he met Chewie. It's just like everything you know about Solo is all answered in this nice little one film.
Yeah. And so, sometimes like prequels do that, and it is one of the worst culprits for it. But there's also like this to me is almost like a tasty Easter egg. It's not trying to answer a big question. It's not trying to answer a plot hole. It's just they've taken a little piece and gone, let's do it, but they've done it well. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like most about it. It's not overplayed. It's not ramming loads of it's not suggesting that C-3PO has got access to the Force. It's not opening up doors to anything ridiculous. It's literally just a story that has a really quite a resonating ending and an implication. So I thought this was a great choice. So
wonderful. The only other thing I'll say about this, apart from I can at the very end of this, I'll plug it because I tackle this as one of the first episodes of my other show. But there's one part which is I want to see the art as well. It feels quite horror-like. Like the first half of it, like I'll show you. You're probably going to see it. The sort of when it gets surrounded by the
The
spiders.
spiders. Yeah.
That bit is horrendous, but also the spiders. That's the little Easter egg I want to flag up, which was in the Ralph McQuarrie concept art for Empire Strikes Back when Luke goes to Dagobah. He made this big spider being. Now, you actually see 3 alternate versions of the spider being. The most accurate is in Mandalorian Series 2 in the Ice Cave.
Right.
So
yes.
that the artwork, the concept art that Ralph McQuarrie did for the original trilogy of Star Wars, they are used a lot in Rebels and a bit in Clone Wars and stuff. They're recycled, which is cool. And so these spiders, the first appearance of them, which is when they're there, that is very, very similar to. There's a creature called Kripka or Kripkta or something. I'm terrible at pronouncing it. And they're in Rebels. And then in Mandalorian, they're the ice spiders or something. And then in this, and they're all slightly different species, but the idea is that they all come from that. Yeah, they all come from that. Almost like the Ralph McQuarrie concept art one was the OG in a sense. And it's kind of
Genesis.
splintered. Yeah, exactly. Which I love it when they do that. I mean, probably what happened is all these people saw the Ralph McQuarrie concept art separately and all just came to the same idea kind of half separately. But Dave Filoni, who is the figurehead at Rebels, and he kind of pushed for the Kripkna to be in Star Wars Rebels, he was involved in Series 2 The Mandalorian a lot more than he was in Series 1. So, like, they are connecting pieces and things, and it just makes the whole world feel bigger. It's just like when we've got... Because on Earth, we've got so many wild cats, haven't we? You know, you've got a lion, a tiger, lynx, panther, jaguar, all kinds of different things. And they all have slightly different traits. Like cheetahs are basically, they're the fastest, but they're like least aggressive. Apparently, they're just ambush predators. And aside from that, they won't really hurt people unless they're really threatened. And it's like a cat, a jaguar, and a tiger, although they look aesthetically quite similar, the way they act, they've got certain traits that are very similar, but there's other certain ones that they don't. Just like lions are the only cat that aren't solitary. And what I like in Star Wars as it's going is that more and more things are loosely connected, but not hard connected, not like forcing it. Like every time we meet a giant spider, it's always this one species. Because when you've got a galaxy full of God knows how many billions of planets, it's just like what are the chances every single one is going to be the same?
You know many of my opinions about the Star Wars. Like, there's a lot of it I love. I grew up with it and I love it. And I do think there are parts of it that do some of the best world building, or even universe building, really, of any franchise. Because world building doesn't have to be in your face. It's just stuff that, like you say, that you see in the background that crops up again and again. You go, oh, that's a thing. Like, that just exists. And then there's other times when and this is a good example of that. Like, there's just this genus of creature that exists in the universe and is quite widespread. It's like a spider, so it taps into that innate fear. And I agree. I kind of like that thing. It's just out there. And then they also have like other people that handle this really badly. There's this sort of thing of sort of just going like in your face, just so you know, like, we've got this character and this character and this, and it's sort of it's the Solo effect. So, but when it's done well like this, I think it's done really, really well. So yeah, no, like I said, we'll sort of wrap up on that because I think it's a good issue, and I definitely recommend tracking it down. I got it on Comixology for a couple of quid. And like I say, it's on Marvel Unlimited, and I'm pretty sure you could track it down in a hard copy, as in a floppy, on eBay for a couple of pounds and also.
Oh yeah, well, I want to say I've got every Star Wars comic I've got a physical copy of, except the adaptations of the movies, because there's not really a need for that. And the hardcover of Shattered Empire you can get them used on Amazon for like £8. So if you want that, obviously use with the whole miniseries, and it's less at the very maximum conceivable price. This will cost you £10, which, to be fair, it's worth £10 by itself. I'd say it's one of those few comics where if you can get the one edition of it, like I would really recommend it because it's just it's 30 odd pages, and it's just a real
excellent
alternate perspective. I'd say.
It is, and this is the kind of thing that when comics is good, they do well. Right. 100%. So we've been to the light side. We've talked about C-3PO. Now we're going to travel to the dark side, and we're going to have 2 dips with Darth Vader, both from the Charles Soule run, issue 5 and issue 25. So let's hit issue 5 first. Now, there's some wider context to it. Obviously, this is, I believe, the end of an arc.
Yes. Yeah.
And
first. Go ahead.
Obviously, one of the things I try to do is I try not to read around it until I've read the issue, so I can take it as almost as a one shot.
Yeah.
And although this is a part of a wider arc, this issue as well works pretty well. You can pick up everything you need to know in the first couple of pages of this, and it works as a one shot as well. So again, great choice. But yeah, this is an interesting one because it's very dialogue light. And you know, the art's great, but it tells a really interesting story. This and the next one actually sort of give you a glimpse behind the mask, don't they? So, I mean, George, do you want to give us some information about this first issue then?
Yeah, so basically there's three Darth Vader runs. Okay, third one we'll ignore, don't need to worry about that. The first one's introduced Dr. Aphra. It was written by Kieran Gillen, and that is set between episode 4, New Hope, and episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. That's a really cool thing. I recommend people go check that out. Charles Soule, who's one of my favorite authors at the moment, he made a 25-issue Darth Vader run in 2017 to 2018, and it's set literally moments after the end of Revenge of the Sith. The first issue, I was tempted to do the first issue, but I chose this one instead. The first issue of the whole run, the first panel you see is him laying on the table thing, and Palpatine says to him, "Oh, it seems like in your anger you killed Padme." And then he does that horrible no thing, which is just pathetic. And then in the comic, he force pushes Palpatine into a wall. Palpatine is pretty hurt, but he kind of gets up and he says, I understand that you're upset. But then he force lightnings him and says, if you ever do anything like that again, I will kill you. Just know that you are a friend and you're my apprentice. But if you touch me like that again, I will murder you. Yeah. And, you know, Vader's suit is basically, in Legends, it's a lot heavily designed, but in canon, it's not as clear. It's basically designed to be very susceptible to force lightning, which is one of the reasons why Vader, in the many years, has never learned to deflect it, is because he's all metal. So, you know, what can you do? So this is basically, I find that this comic series, the Charles Soule run, is my favorite of any Star Wars comics because I enjoy Anakin in the prequel trilogy. Clone Wars does an infinitely better job at showing what Anakin can be like, but a lot of people, understandably, felt like his transition to Vader, when you see him in the end of episode 3 and then you see him in, let's say, Rogue One, you're like, even if you know it's been about 19 years, it just there's something that doesn't quite fit. And this comic answers that. It doesn't shoehorn in unnecessary information, but what it does very cleverly is there are certain arcs, and it's the first arc and the last arc which do it the best, which are two of the things I chose, which is him struggling to find himself, struggling to be Vader. And this specific arc is called The Chosen One, and it's 5 parts, and this is the 5th part, is about him getting his lightsaber. And for people, very brief, to get red lightsabers in canon, you have to bleed a normal lightsaber. So you have to grab it and put bad energy into it, and it turns it red. This is the story of how, because obviously Anakin's saber gets lost, and then, you know, Obi-Wan picks it up and gives it to Luke, and then it gets lost again, and then eventually Rey's got it. But Darth Vader's lightsaber is its own thing. And the first 4 issues is him basically beating this Jedi that's hiding in Order 66. He gets the saber crystal, and that's where this starts. And it's just, as you say, it's not very dialogue heavy, but most of the Vader comics, they introduced another character to be the dialogue heavy person, like Dr. Aphra, because obviously Vader doesn't talk much. But I just think it takes a special amount of skill, not just to write, but also to draw and ink and color and all that sort of stuff. All the people involved in this, a special skill to have Darth Vader, you understand his emotions when you can't see his face. Yeah. It's a really, Darth Vader is very imposing and obviously very scary looking, but in this, and especially, we'll get onto the other one afterwards, obviously, but in the last one as well, they do a very different way of handling it. But I just think these comics do such a good job of portraying Anakin to Vader so much, I'd say better, really, than the actual films do, which is once again one of those things where it's like, it's upsetting that is the fact, but I'm happy at the same time that we at least get this, rather than like a lot of film franchises go, this film's crap and there's nothing you can do, so move on. At least with this, it's a bit of plastering.
Well, this is, you know, and again, one of the jokes I always, you know, the little ribs I have is that, you know, for every plot hole there's a comic in Star Wars.
It's true.
And often you know, when we cover the films, you're even like, well, there's an issue. But again, this is something, this comes into the world building rather than, I would say this is world building rather than plot hole filling. And I'd say there's a difference in that. Plot hole filling is Rogue One. You know, where they've gone like, yeah, how did we have this one minor thing on this Death Star that seems to destroy everything and goes into the main reactor? That's nuts. So they do this whole thing to rectify it. This, however, though, tells that story of like, you have Revenge of the Sith, and then you meet pretty much like, the next time you see him canonically in the films is Rogue One, and it's like, oh, here's fully formed Darth Vader. He's a badass, and he can throw people around a ship and all this other stuff, and he's got his red lightsaber. And you sort of go, well, there's a period of time there then of that journey, and that's obviously what they're chipping into. But straight, like you say, straight after him, but gaining the suit, and from Palpatine and all this other stuff, like, although he's gone to the dark side, like you say, it's this thing of, it's not a switch, like, he's lost, he's in grief, PTSD. We've talked about before. There will be moments, and I do like the fact that, like you say, it's not an easy journey. It's not like he sits up and he's like, well, I'm the baddie now. It's and this book's interesting in that, and it's, in many ways, it's the reverse of like a hero's journey. Because when you see these films, when you see an origin story, and obviously, we've seen plenty of them over the last couple of years with the MCU and all this other stuff. That journey from a character going from who they are to becoming the hero you recognize, going, oh, that's the Batman we know from the sort of the young Bruce Wayne, or, one of the best versions to me is always going to be Captain America. The sort of skinny Steve Rogers going to becoming Cap and all the stuff, and eventually becoming the Cap we know and love today. And you go, well, that's the hero's journey. That's them developing and filling their role. And you go, yeah, but like, villains don't just wake up one day and go, do you know what? Green Goblin today. That's it. I'm done being normal. I'm going to become the Green Goblin. No, and I love the fact that this deals with that. That this is a villain's journey. Like, for his story to be completed, for him to become the Darth Vader we know, he goes through these trials and tribulations. Which also, again, we know that there are the trials of the Jedi. So for this thing to happen, for a Sith to have to go through something similar, seems appropriate. So yeah, I was really interested by this book, and especially some of the things that the Kyber crystal throws at him, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, well, that's that. The Kyber crystal parts is about halfway through the book. There's like 2 big double-page spreads. I think that's what I'm thinking of. I'm just scrolling through it myself now. He just picks it up, and he has a couple. He basically has 2 or maybe 3 force visions, and then there's this big 2 double-page spreads of him, kind of his life flashing before his eyes in a lot of ways of what was Anakin. And I just think the artwork in itself is absolutely phenomenal, and just the double-page spread, which is, I'm going to show you once again, that one there. Oh god, it's just disappeared. The double-page spread, which is there, when you can see Vader at the top there, that panel is my favorite panel in probably all of Star Wars, just from the imagery that goes with it and things. And it's like, I feel like this comic in itself, mixed with the last comic we're going to talk about, is just, it shows that transition so well. And the thing is that bleeding lightsaber crystals is a very, very new thing. In Legends, Sith just got synthetic ones. They had to make a synthetic crystal, and whenever you make a Kyber crystal synthetically, it always comes out red. That's kind of one of the things in Legends. But in this, the only 2 times you ever get to see lightsaber bleeding are in both of Charles Soule's comics. One is The Rise of Kylo Ren, and the other one's this one. And I almost chose the last Rise of Kylo Ren comic as well, actually. That was a temptation. But I thought with this one, it works so much better as its own thing. And I've read this comic so many times. Occasionally, I'm just like, I just really want to see Vader's Force visions again. And I just basically skip to the middle and just stare at it. I'm just like, I could just stare at it for hours. It was like a poster.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm looking at the same. Funny enough, when you showed that, I was looking at the same page here. One of the things I would say is, and this is one of the things, again, I love about comics, and you get a good artist, because it's not just about drawing a good image, and the art in this is great. The designs are fantastic. But the artist is almost like a cinematographer. They act in a cinematographer way, so that they control the perspective, they control the journey you go on. And especially, one of the reasons I love digital comics, like I'm 100% digital now, pretty much, is that when you use guided thing, like, I don't like to see spoilers, because one of the biggest things with comics is you open a page and you sort of like, they're still teasing you in this panel, but then by this panel down here, there's the big reveal, and you go, well, I've fucking seen that already. So, but you get artists that can give you a panel layout that guides you. And one of the things is, if you use the guided view on Comixology or Marvel Unlimited, as you go through this of him trying to bleed this crystal, it shows you the sort of his memories. So the first one you got all the stuff that's going around on Mustafar, which is where he is. The first thing he remembers is Obi-Wan after their fight, I assume, and you can see his rage. And then you sort of start to get all this grief. So you get the moment of him carrying a dead Padme, and then you see Padme. You think, oh, he's not turning the crystal red, and then you just get this glimpse of Palpatine, and it's sort of like it's him. I read it as it's like him, not just bleeding the crystal, but like he's bleeding out all his negativity, all these events that have basically sort of like he's angry about and resentful about and bitter about and grief-stricken about and being bled into this crystal. And it sort of again goes to show you, like, yeah, Darth Vader, he is a baddie. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, he stands by and destroys a planet full of people. Like, he is a baddie. But this, almost like you said, almost better than the prequels, tells you why he is what he is. He's like, yeah, this artist in a few panels sort of says, here's all the grief, but all this grief, and it's sort of the I suppose it's the phraseology that they use a lot of going to the dark side. Hate, fear leads to hate, or hate leads to this, that, and then leads to the dark side. And as you go through the panels, it's sort of like, as I say, it starts with Obi-Wan, goes through, so it goes with anger, then fear, or then grief, and then leads to Palpatine. And it's like, it's such a really good journey that's been depicted here. Like, it's been drawn, and then ends with him bleeding the crystal. It's like, this is really well done. Like, again,
yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things that what this comic does well, like Charles Soule, I think he's maybe not the Alan Moore, but the Neil Gaiman of Star Wars at the moment, I'd say, because this Darth Vader run is considered, along with Kieran Gillen's Darth Vader run, are considered the two best Star Wars comics. And I love Kieran Gillen's. I just think, for me, this one's better.
Yeah.
He's done a Lando miniseries, excellent. Rise of Kylo Ren miniseries, excellent. The Obi-Wan Anakin miniseries is okay. And then he's done a Poe Dameron series, which I have not yet read. It's the only Star Wars comics in Marvel I haven't read, but I'm saving them. And he's also done The High Republic, which is he did the Light of the Jedi book, which I did a review on. And that book is the best Star Wars book I've read. I've read about 15, I think, or 10 or something. And all of them are really good. I haven't read a bad Star Wars book, but that one is so good by so far. The first third of the book is some of the best Star Wars I've ever read. And I just think that he understands characters so much better than probably George Lucas in some ways, because one of the common themes with Charles Soule's representation of Darth Vader is the whole idea is that Darth Vader's been a slave his whole life. He was a slave on Tatooine with his mum. Then he was a slave to the Jedi and their teaching, and he couldn't, he felt like he couldn't love. He felt like he had to do all these things. He was told that he had to do these things. And, in Revenge of the Sith, he's like, oh, I shouldn't kill Dooku. It's not the Jedi way. Palpatine's like, just do it. And he does it. And then when it's the other way around, and he's there, and he's like, Mace, you can't kill Palpatine. It's not the Jedi way. Mace goes to do it, and then he, cleans off Mace's arm. And then he's, at that moment, he swaps from being a Jedi slave to then a Sith slave. And then for his whole life as Vader, he was meant to be the chosen one. He's meant to be this powerful being. He was meant to, his whole idea was he was going to become more powerful than the Chancellor. And then because he was a bit too cocky with Obi-Wan, he got his limbs sliced off, and now he's just even worse off than he's ever been.
Yeah.
And it's just this thing, as you say, I can't remember the exact order, but it's something like, fear leads to hate, hate leads to anger, anger leads to suffering, suffering is that sort of thing. And as you say, like, Darth Vader's crystal, and one of the brilliant things that mirrors is the Rise of Kylo Ren one, is when Rise of Kylo Ren comic, when he bleeds as a crystal, it doesn't bleed fully. It cracks, and that's why his lightsaber's so crazy. And it's like, Vader's lost everything. Yeah. And the final thing that you pointed out, at the very last thing, is, he sees Obi-Wan, his brother, father, mentor, whatever, but in his eyes betrayed him. He's carrying the corpse of his mum. He then sees Padme's face. He then sees fire and Mustafar, and then he sees Palpatine. And it's just like, Palpatine is the hate part.
Yes.
Everything else has been suffering and pain, maybe his own doings. But Palpatine, he really hates Palpatine for tricking him and trapping him into this form that he's now in. And obviously, he's left on Mustafar to die, and Palpatine basically won't let him die. And I can't remember if it's in this series. I can't remember if it's right at the end or not, but there's somewhere at some point I read it was something basically Vader just is alive because he's just kind of almost, it's not that he can't die, but it's almost like if he stops and has a breather, he probably would eventually just kind of crumble. But because Palpatine's always constantly trying to get him to do stuff, in the Kieran Gillen comics, he messes up, you know, the whole A New Hope thing when he lets Luke blow up. Palpatine makes him suffer for that for like ages. And it's just that constant thing of Palpatine's just torturing him. It's horrendous.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because one of the things I noticed in this is when the Kyber Crystal sort of offers him an alternative of like this other path, it's him going off and he's, you know, he has the green lightsaber and he goes and attacks Palpatine, and then he meets with Obi-Wan, and you think, oh, this is going to be a redemptive moment, and they're going to go off and you know, become the partnership again. That's what this is showing. Like, this is still possible. No, it's like, no, even the Kyber Crystal's going, no, the only alternative is for you is to kill Palpatine and then accept your own death. That's what it's saying. You know, your redemption comes with your death. And so there is no positive outcome for Vader in this, which is why sort of he's going, no. You know, you say the hate is then directed towards Palpatine. So again, it's one of those books that you read this and go, well, that puts another slant on things when I'm watching, especially Return of the Jedi.
Yes.
So reading this and the next one, and we'll get to that in a second, but reading this in the next book, I wanted to go, and I've been waiting for this conversation. I think I'm going to watch it the weekend. I'm going to go back and watch Return of the Jedi just for that last bit, because all of this feeds into that thing of like, for all these years, you know, Vader's done all this stuff. He's done some terrible things. He's worked for Palpatine, but there's always been a glimmer of like, you know, like you say, I fucking hate my boss. And it's there. And so it just adds a bit more to it. And I just find that fascinating.
And one of the things as well that I was going to say is that in that sort of Force vision where he goes up to Obi-Wan, so he kills Palpatine in the Force vision and he goes to Obi-Wan, he kneels in front of Obi-Wan and says, please. Yeah. And Obi-Wan's got his lightsaber ignited. He wants Obi-Wan to kill him. Yeah. And him now, after the fact, he really wanted Obi-Wan to kill him then and there on Mustafar. He wanted to die. Once you've had all that happen to you, there's no point living. But Obi-Wan doesn't give him the satisfaction. Obi-Wan really couldn't kill his brother. That's the reality of it. And obviously, because they're prequels, you had to have Vader in it. But like, Obi-Wan couldn't kill him. And that's the thing that the only time Anakin would have really needed that tough love, which is what Obi-Wan's been on his case about all the time, is all this tough love done. And then the Force vision is like, please kill me. Yeah. And Obi-Wan turns his lightsaber off. And it's like, that is so true to form. And I will say as well is that what I really recommend is the current Darth Vader run, which is by Greg Pak. And that is between episodes 5 and 6. It links to Rise of Skywalker. It shows how Vader got the Wayfinder for Exegol and stuff. There's a Force vision in that, and I won't spoil it, but it goes into, he sees a reality of what could happen if Luke kills him in Return of the Jedi. And he has a Force vision about that set within a year of that happening. And so what the comics are doing is when you see Vader change, you know, the between Empire and Return of the Jedi, it's about a year. Yeah. And in the good thing about the original trilogy is there's not that much that is a plot hole. There's a couple of bits which don't really make a lot of sense across them, but generally as a trilogy, most of it makes sense and works. You believe Vader's turn because of stuff. But when you read the comics, you go, when you see that the whole time Vader's under Palpatine's thumb, he's always trying to outmaneuver him. He's trying to overthrow him. He's trying to do this. And Palpatine's always so much further ahead because he's so much more intelligent than Vader. The Vader can never catch a break. And every time Vader tries, Palpatine basically wipes it all away, pats Vader on the head and goes, good boy, you tried. Move on. And every time, and it just goes on for like 25 years of Vader's life of that. And I just think that the new run of Vader comics, there's about 10 of them out at the moment. I would really recommend reading them because there's just this one Force vision in there, and you're just like, Jesus, his life is not a pleasant one.
And I think that's what the thing to realize is, like I said, these are world building again. And so I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was fascinating to see. And again, I love the fact that it's dialogue light, but says so much, which I think goes towards both, you know, that's not to say that Charles Soule didn't do anything. He's obviously, he's written this to be this way, and the artist has then sort of like presented it. So it's really good. Let's just jump to the final issue then, to 25 of this Charles Soule role, because it does a similar thing. Like, it's very similar in its thing of this searching of what is Vader, who is Vader, and has these flashbacks. What's the context of this one then? Because this is also part 7 of Fortress Vader.
Yeah, very brief. So in that same run, this is now, I think this is within 2 years now. I'm pretty certain in these Vader comics, the 25, there's a time jump at some point of about 2 years. I think it might be after the comic we just tackled, actually. And then he gets the Inquisitors and things, which are from Rebels and stuff. And basically, he needs to have some sort of lair or whatever. And this arc is called Fortress Vader. And in Rogue One, you see it very briefly, and you see it, I think, in the Fallen Order game as well. But basically, Vader has a fortress on Mustafar, and he goes there in his back to tanks to meditate and things. You see Inspector Krennic go there in Rogue One, and he basically needed to make one, and Palpatine basically said, you need to find your own way, you need to do this, do that, blah, have a force vision, etc. And it all started with Palpatine gave him this mask that was cursed, and he got an architect, and he tried to make Fortress Vader. I think it was some stupid amount, like 20 times, or ridiculous, but Vader kept hating it and stopping him and starting again, blah, blah, blah. And then this mask goes mental, and the last like 4 issues of this mask that have taken over someone's body of an ancient Sith, and he's fighting Vader, blah, blah, blah. But this starts now where he's defeated that ancient Sith. He's just by himself in this fortress he's made, and Momin, this Sith, basically activated a portal on Mustafar, because Mustafar's full of dark side energy and stuff. He activated this portal, which is meant to be able to bring people back from the dead. So what Momin did, he's got this weird possession of the helmet. Momin's idea was he was going to go in there and bring back himself, and then Momin would be the powerful Sith, blah, blah, blah. Vader kills Momin. As soon as he flickers, he's like, wait a minute, there's a portal that can bring people back to life. And so he kills Momin, and he steps through the portal. And this first panel is Vader stepping through this weird ancient portal thing. And I just think the artwork in this comic is my favorite artwork of anything I've ever seen. It's just...
Yeah, I do think it's worth calling out, actually, because we sort of say, again, it's Charles Soule, it's Giuseppe Camuncoli. Mm-hmm. So I think obviously, I'm going to assume Italian. His art on this and the last one, because he did the last one as well. Fantastic, absolutely phenomenal. I talked about him being like the cinematographer in the panel layout. Like again, the sort of the panel layout and the storytelling in the art in this is absolutely blinding. It's fantastic, really well done, and some really interesting nods in this as well. You know, and stuff. We'll get to one in a little bit, but this again, though, sort of tells that story of Vader from let's say Anakin from a child, depicting him reaching this moment, to sort of to gain Fortress Vader in this weird sort of spirit guise as well, though, which I think is kind of cool. It looks really cool. Because he gets this vision. There's a really cool moment in this where he's gone through all his force, they've seen all the past, and he looks at what is being built, and he's, it's this sort of like black silhouette, and then it sort of like it pans back and it looks at him, and then it pans back. It depends on your point. What does it say? It says the truth that we cling to depends on your point of view, and it pans back and you can see this glittering vision of a building, which I think is it supposed to be the
Jedi Temple.
Is it the Jedi Temple? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I'm on the same part that you are. Yeah. The thing in the top is the Fortress of Vader.
Yes.
And then, it says depends on your point of view, and it changes to the Jedi Temple.
And then obviously it gets presented by the sort of all these dead Jedi. But again, like I say, I like this thing of like the Jedi. It's not gone from him, because we always think of him as a Sith. That's that's how you were first introduced to him, all this other stuff. But you think, obviously we know it was Anakin now. But I love the fact that the book keep tapping into this fact that, like, in the back of his head, he is still a trained Jedi. We had all these years. He was sort of, and so it's still always there. It's almost like, again, it's this thing about the hero's journey versus the villain's journey. I think of. You always get characters that committed atrocities at some point, and now they do their heroic acts as a sort of an act of redemption. They sort of, okay, well, I did these things during the war, but now I'm back and I have to do these things to redeem myself, to protect the people. And this is almost this is the reverse. Like, I spent all these years as a good guy, so now I've got to do dreadful things to people to to be a true Sith. and so it's just this sort of like flipping of the trope that I kind of like. It works for me, and he having to face up to these things as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love that I only clocked this on this reread is actually in the, where is it, on the fourth page. So like, well, basically the one after, when he walks into after the first panel, you see him in the portal. The way you see him, for people listening, is you see his corpse. So from his like thighs up, and from his like so the middle of his arm sort of up, and his head is the burnt, crisp Vader. You know, it's black and it's a red and things, and you can see his glowing eyes. But then his limbs are made from, like, as you said, like a spirit guide, like a force guide, like a force ghost sort of thing. What's interesting is that the color of that is blue, and that would indicate light. And one of his arms is missing.
Yeah.
So obviously his Jedi form is the kind of extension of himself in a way, but he still lost that part of his hand while he was a Jedi when he fought Dooku in episode 2. So it was interesting that part, and that was obviously very specific, I would say, by Charles Soule, because he's very much a man about detail. And you just see that and you go, okay, so even in his true Jedi form, when he's having a Force vision and stuff, he still hasn't got that part of his hand back, because he lost that as a Jedi, and that's fair. That him as a Jedi is one-handed. And I just think that little thing is brilliant. And just, as you say, there's so many little nods here. Like the first time when he looks at his mum, and you see Palpatine there, and it says, you know, your birth, there's no father, your birth was unnatural, you're the chosen one. And then you see Palpatine's ghost around Shmi, and then some weird spiral where her pregnant belly is. That's in Legends. Plagueis and Palpatine created Anakin. But what they did is they tried to create an evil Sith, and then the Force basically created Anakin as a basically middle finger to them, basically going, you know what, you can't create life out of this. No. But then the midichlorians made Anakin to try and be the one that brings balance. And obviously eventually he does. So it's just all these little clever nods. And it goes through the chronology of Anakin. And one thing I say about this is that you hear a lot of people, and a lot of the groups I'm in, talk about they want a Darth Vader movie. And I do not want a Darth Vader movie. If they made one, I would happily watch it, and I'm sure it would be a lot of fun. But I don't want one, because I just think, unless you're going to remake this, you can't do it better. You won't, and they'll ruin this, I think, if they made one. You know what I mean? If they try to make a Vader story and they try to make him sympathetic and, you know, pining after Padme and all this other stuff, it's been done in the comics twice. If you do it again, it just loses. It takes away from the comics.
It does. I agree.
It's fair.
One of the things, again, this comes down to the benefits of comics over film. In a film, you've got what, 2.5 hours max, really. Right, and you can do a lot in that time. You can, but you, in this, with a really good run, you can have 25 issues, and you can tackle so many things. You can have time jumps, and you can do all these different things. In a monologues, you can address things. It just gives you a depth of storytelling that you just don't get from a film. And also, I find it difficult sometimes when they try and make a villain sympathetic in films. It sometimes comes across in the wrong way. Joker, I'm looking at you. But I think this works. But there were two things whilst I was reading this that really sprang out to me, and I really wanted to put them to you. And you've actually answered the first one, because my first one was, it seems like he's part Force Ghost, and I was interested. I was confused by that. But the other one is, we all talk about Luke Skywalker. Like, Luke is the hero of the original trilogy and sort of all this other stuff. But let's be clear. I think Star Wars is the story of Darth Vader, or is the story of Anakin. And I'd never thought of that, and it's because I'm not as close as you are. And I think, like, has that now become a bit of because obviously you've got Clone Wars and other stuff. There's never been a cartoon that's followed Luke or Leia between films, or even like post Return of the Jedi. It's all been focused around the Clone Wars, which fine, makes sense, because that's, you don't really want the bureaucratic years. Makes no sense. But I feel more and more that people have connected to the corruption of Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader as the journey of Star Wars, which is fascinating to me, because this is supposed to be the heroic film. I mean, look, the first film is that Luke Skywalker's journey is literally beat for beat, that sort of the hero's journey, the sort of hero of a thousand faces, that sort of every step. I'm reading it at the moment, and you can, it's all there, which is no problem. It's mythological. It's supposed to be. But Vader's journey from being this child to becoming this being, and then his redemptive act, seems to have become almost like the true heart of some of the Star Wars stuff, and the impact it's had on the wider universe. Is that fair? Is that sort of is there a place for that?
Yeah, I mean, the way I've described Star Wars now to a couple of my friends who still haven't seen it, occasionally they say to me, they go, Mike, yep, so I got something bad to tell you. And I'm like, is it to do with Star Wars? And they're like, yeah, I've never seen Star Wars. And I'm like, well, first off, you're lying, because if you've lived on this earth for 20-something years, you've caught Star Wars somewhere. You've probably either just can't remember it or whatever. You've seen Toy Story 2, you've seen part of Star Wars. It's everywhere. But I describe to people as it's a story of redemption. That's how I would describe Star Wars, because the first three is showing how not only just Vader, but also the Jedi. The first three is these Jedi, the prequels, who are basically dicks and are really quite annoying and jarring, and all the coolest ones like Qui-Gon get wrecked. And then you've got Obi-Wan, who I like very much as a character, but in the prequels, he's just, apart from beating Anakin and Grievous, he doesn't, and discovering the clone army, I suppose, he doesn't hit the high notes one would expect him to in his prime. And there's reasoning for that story-wise, which I think was more of an accident by Lucas than anything. But with the prequels, it's the fall. Yeah. In the originals, it's the rise and the return and the redemption. And then in the sequels, it's the legacy. I think what it is, and one of the things that actually annoyed me in the way I would have wanted Rise of Skywalker to end is I would have wanted Ben Solo to survive, for Rey to maybe die. If she didn't die, it wouldn't be a big deal. But I don't care about Rey if she lives or not. I wanted Kylo/Ben to have lived, and then the last couple scenes is the New Republic trying to work out what to do with him, and thinking that what he needs to do is be the opposite of Vader, and he needs to be basically a slave to the Resistance or the New Republic to make up for all of the crimes he did. Because my least favorite thing, I mean, when they did it in the original trilogy, groundbreaking and stuff, but there's too many times I see in films, and it's every action film now, you get the baddie and they, they're really awful. They murder children, or they blow up a bomb or some horrendous stuff, or they kill the, protagonist's best mate in a horrendous way. And then right at the end of the film, they do one redemptive act and then they die immediately. And it's just like that isn't how the world works. You don't just do horrible shit, do one nice thing, and then you die and you go to heaven. And what I wanted was the consequence. If there's a comic, no, not a comic. I can't remember where I heard it, but there's someone talking about what if Vader had survived? What if Luke had saved Vader from Palpatine, and he didn't die, and his suit somehow didn't malfunction the way it did, and he lived after? What would happen? And if Vader was genuinely called out and he wasn't going to try and murder everyone? And there's a lot of people, there's quite a few ideas I've heard of what people think, and I would want that, because I feel like it adds another depth to the Vader story, because the Vader story is, the other things about Rise of Skywalker I'm not as much a fan of is Palpatine coming back and all this sort of things. It just kind of takes away a little bit from, Vader and things. But the story of Vader is the thing that's most compelling. And I think that's one of the reasons why Hayden Christensen's acting in, especially Attack of the Clones, leaves a lot to be desired. I personally think he's all right in Revenge of the Sith for the most part. But a lot of people have been rallying behind, Kenobi and the fact that Hayden Christensen's back in it. And I know a lot of people aren't happy about that, which I understand. What I hope is that Kenobi gives Hayden Christensen another chance. He doesn't fuck it up. And they get a Vader close enough to these comics. What I'm hoping is, because as you said, like, the general consensus for Star Wars fans is always, when something new comes out and they hate it, and then it takes a little while for people to stop hating it for being new, and then eventually they start to like it. The prequels, memes have become the resurgence of that. In 5-10 years time, people are going to look back on the sequel trilogy and say how much they love it, because generationally and other things. The redemption of Vader is my favorite part, and I love nothing more in stories than having a character go from good to bad or bad to good. I prefer good to bad, because bad to good is so overdone now, and it's quite easy in a way to do the storytelling. Yeah. But to have someone go from good to bad in a compelling way,
well, it works
so hard.
It works well, and I'm gonna. there's a couple of things I want to tap into actually around
Yeah,
what
go
you've
ahead.
said there. I love what you've said. And it's because I've always thought there about the groups of trilogies. There being it's the corruption, the redemption, and the legacy. And one of the things I was most disappointed about with the sequel trilogy, and there's a long list, but one of the things I was most disappointed is this idea. It becomes because it comes around to Palpatine again. It's almost like you say, it becomes throwaway because it's like, oh, of course, like I don't care. But it's not Palpatine's legacy that's important. When you watch the films, it's sort of like you have these two opposing forces. You know, so you've got Anakin as you know, and the Sith and the Jedi is what it all comes down to, and you've got what like these two, these characters go on this trajectory. So you have, like you say, Darth Vader's running through. Then you've got the Skywalker, sort of on the Jedi side, and they reach this point, and you get to Return of the Jedi, and you have what happened. And what I was hoping, especially, you know, I can accept Force Awakens, was it middle one?
Last Jedi.
Last Jedi. I can accept what they do with Luke Skywalker in that because, you know, it's fine. The film itself is a bit of a mess, but there's some good stuff in there. But I like this tapping into this idea of, like, you know, don't meet your heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is, like, you've got Ben Solo, who's now become Kylo Ren, based on this sort of, even wearing cosplay of Darth Vader, you know, sort of this notion of the legend and how it impacts on you. And Rey is no different. When she gets this thing of meeting Luke Skywalker, she's as giddy as a schoolgirl. It's built around his legend rather than the person. So to then meet him and find out he's actually a bit of a prick. But that happens to all of us. Like, you know, we all meet people and you go, oh, well, he wasn't as nice as I thought. And, you know, you don't take context into account. But I like this idea of this story that is, like I say, the corruption, the redemption, and then the impact of legacy or the impact of legend. You know, when everyone looks at the legend and not the person. And that wasn't played out, and that really disappointed me. But I like the fact that this book, this one in particular, has a couple of moments that really taps into that, this idea of legacy, you know, and the fact that things stay with you. There's a great panel when he finally beats all these sort of, like, you know, these the Jedi ghosts. They're not really ghosts, they're not Force ghosts, but these sort of like depictions of Jedi in front of the temple, and he walks into the temple, or this version of it, and there's a picture of Palpatine before the corruption, before he gets sort of, like, you know, messed up, and an Obi-Wan, and between them it says, "I am your father," which obviously we know, you know, it's not the true quote from the film, it's the one we all think is there. But I love that idea that there's this choice, there's this hangover, there's this legacy of this past, and then they have a fight, and he still makes this weird choice of, he watches Obi-Wan killed, but then still turns on Palpatine, which taps into this thing of, like, you know, he's not really, you know, he's not, well, I'm not going to defend Obi-Wan, but you know what? I'm not a fan of Palpatine either. And it still comes down to Padme, and I just like this idea that throughout all of this stuff, all the Star Wars films always comes back to this idea of the baggage and the shit that we carry with us is actually really important. And it just makes, they seem to have honed in on Vader as being this nuanced villain that he's not really in the films in many cases, but they've really made him that. And I just find that really fascinating that they've done this. And I'm definitely going to go back and read this run.
Yeah, it is. I'd say it is my favorite Vader run, and I would say I would recommend the Greg Pak one at the moment. I'd say the way to describe it is the Kieran Gillen one. It's a lot of fun, it's cool, but it only goes so deep. Then this one, it's the opposite. It doesn't really connect to the original trilogy in the sense story-wise, but in themes and emotional weight of the character, it's heavy. The Greg Pak new run is right in the middle.
Yeah.
It's got connections to the sequel trilogy. It's got flashbacks. One of the storylines is in the Greg Pak one is in the first or second comic, and it's on the cover, so I'm not spoiling anything. He meets, you know, in the prequels, Padme's got all the handmaidens, and there's a couple that impersonate her. Right in the first one, there's like Sabe and a couple
Keira
of others
Knightley.
whose names escape me. Yeah. One of, I think it is Keira Knightley's character. She's in the Darth Vader comics.
Right.
He's still pretending to be Padme, and he sees her. And he just looks at her, and then the comic ends, and then you see. But the first part of the comic, he's staring at, and he can't understand because she looks. She's wearing the stuff she wore on Tatooine, the white thing, and he's staring at her. when he's meant to be going on this quest because it's all about, he finds out obviously Luke's alive, fully in the first set of comics, Darth Vader's trying to find out who Luke is or who blocked the Death Star. Then he finds out from Boba Fett it's Luke, and then he's trying to basically hunt down Luke. Then he finds Luke eventually in Empire Strikes Back. He reaches out his hand to Luke. Luke says no, and then Luke basically chooses he'd rather die than be with his dad, which way he lets go of the thing and falls. In the Greg Pak comics, the third one, it's Vader trying to deal with the fact that his son, the only person he thought maybe could bring him some sort of salvation, has rejected him because of his choices. And it's him going through, and he goes back through and he meets like the mortician who buried Padme and says, was Padme pregnant with twins or whatever, trying to find out more information about Padme and to try and find Luke again. And him coming into contact with Padme's kind, and she doesn't know he's Anakin. So she knows he's Vader, knows the sort of,
the iconography of it,
yeah, and she's terrified of him, obviously, because he can just wipe
understandably,
them out. But the dynamic and the depth, and there's a lot of flashbacks about him looking at her, and then there's the next panel is like him looking at her from Attack of the Clones, or whatever. So if people like these comics, the second run, the third run is a real nice middle between the depth of this one and the other ones, and it's just really cool. The imagery of this is more powerful than the storytelling, I'd say. The storytelling is really cool. Fortress Vader is a cool story, but I don't really give a shit about Darth Vader having a fortress on Mustafar because it's barely anywhere apart from Rogue One for like a second. So that doesn't interest me necessarily because I don't need to know how many plans the architect went through when building Vader's castle. I don't give a shit about that. But when you see it and you see like, it's almost like the what ifs. In a sense, these Force visions, and one of the things my friend Reese actually said is the one thing he likes the least about Star Wars and the canon and stuff is the fact that because there's a new canon, everything has to connect. He said he would just want like 100 what if stories about Vader. What if this happened? What if? Because he just thinks Vader's such a cool character, you could do anything with him. And I think you and I discussed on one of our shows, like Vader versus aliens. The xenomorphs. That'd be probably the coolest story ever. And I wanted to be a comic of it, and I've got fingers crossed at one point in the next few decades.
Just a one. If I tell you what, we'll get on to. No, I will tell you now. My dream is that that Marvel just do at one point a series of one shots where they take all the properties that they own and going to go. We're going to have Vader versus the xenomorphs, and then we're going to put Wolverine versus Predator. Just one shot. Don't have to be in canon. Just we're going to do a good story, pick someone, and then we're going to do these things. So that'd be great.
I'd kill for them.
Yeah,
it's amazing. But as I said, the imagery of this, where the whole thing is still the whole of this run, because this is the finale of a 25 run, is him just trying in any way of desperation to somehow, as soon as he gets a glimpse that maybe he could bring Padme back, he goes into this realm and he approaches her. And it's so strong because like you see him throughout the vision, he's slowly forming again, as in like his hands come back in the Force Ghost sort of style after he does a few things. And so he's like, he walks up to Padme, he's got all his skin and he looks like Anakin from episode 3. And he reaches out to her and then, her eyes go and she says, Anakin Skywalker's dead. And she jumps off the balcony rather than be with him. And he reaches down for her saying, I won't let you go. And then a bit of lightning just disintegrates her completely, and he's just there.
More than that, as she starts to throttle herself, which is creepy as hell.
It is like the artwork once again in these comics are incredible, and you're just watching her slowly fall and go horrendous, and then just the lightning cuts her in half basically, and he says no, and then you see no loads and loads of times and whatever. But it's just like Anakin would do anything to get to Padme. And the whole irony of it is that's the problem, is that he wants Padme for himself. That's basically the idea. He had possessive love rather than true love, which is one of the reasons he went wrong. But it's like he will do anything to Padme. And most people, when they say, I'll do anything for love, there's a Meatloaf song. I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. I'll do anything for love. I'll do anything for you. But when it comes to, I will literally commit genocide, I will murder children, and I'll throw away all my beliefs and kill everyone I've ever cared about just so I have a chance of being with you. Well, that's too far. And Anakin never had that. And I think that with this comic, this is the final, not necessarily final echoes, because it comes up again at some point, but like one of those big pins in the coffin, which is saying, yeah, you fucked up. You were the reason that Padme went. It was no one else. Like this whole Force vision, even if you killed Palpatine, even if you beat Obi-Wan, even if you killed every Jedi and none of them ever betrayed you as he views it, she still wouldn't want you, because the point is that you became everything she hated for a chance to be with her, and that's your biggest problem. And I just think this comic does it so much better than Revenge of the Sith does. I love Revenge of the Sith.
It does. It really does. It's like you say, it completes the story. It adds depth to it. I mean, again, this is the benefit of comics. They can do some great stuff. And I love the fact that like this final bit, that when Padme sort of throws herself off, and you, instead of getting like no, you do get the no, and it works. But there's two bits that I really like, and there's a third which we'll come to in a minute because it's a little funnier. But he gets like a I assume it's a Force vision, because he gets a glimpse. He sort of has got his temple there, his fortress, and he stood at the balcony. You see this flash of blue white light, and there's a figure in it, and it's sort of then the noise comes up as the sort of the saber, and it's clearly supposed to be Luke, and it's depicting sort of like his own finale, his own final, and that's when he sort of wakes up and stuff. But you get this moment towards the end as well, where he sort of Palpatine says to him, "Good, tell me, Lord Vader, the truth you learned on Mustafar. Was it what you sought? Was it what you needed?" And it's sort of like he's obviously saying that was it what was it? I think it's a genuine question. Was it what you needed? And he sort of the final panel is a full page spread of Vader saying yes, but it's not. It's this thing of saying, well, no, that yes it's not what he wanted. Because he wanted to, like you say, to contact with Padme and bring her back and do whatever was needed. It's what it's not what he wanted. It's what he needed, or what is needed for him to continue his journey as Vader. It's this thing of like, oh yeah, as you said, that nail in the coffin. It's that moment where it's like, yes, it's what I needed to put these childish thoughts aside and to focus on this thing. And I like that moment. I really like it as a sort of definitive moment. So yeah, excellent, absolutely excellent. Something I will throw in, because just say little nods. Third page in, I think it's third page, a couple of pages in, you get the first part where it goes back to him on Tatooine.
Yes,
as a kid, and you get two within 3 panels. You get 2 little sort of like nods, which I thought was hilarious. You get him going. He's running down the street and he says, "Ah, stupid sand," and I was like, "Love it." I thought I hate that line in Attack of the Clones, but works here. But then also you get the bit where his shadow, the little boy, little Anakin, has the Darth Vader shadow. It's the bloody poster.
Yeah, it is.
And I was like, that's awesome. That is so cool. But I did want to ask, like, because it goes back to you then have like the corrupted, burnt version of the child, which is interesting. But you also see a moment when young Anakin wakes up and shouts no, and his mum sort of attends to him. And she says, "Only a dream." I just need to confirm, because you sort of see it behind him then as a sort of like he's seeing these memories, these things, and these burning images. Was he having Force visions as a kid then of him and this sort of as Vader in the future already? Is that what that's saying?
There's no, to my knowledge, there's no definitive answer. I think that part is specifically down for interpretation, and I like to think yes, because there is a line by Qui-Gon, and he does say to Shmi when he meets Anakin, he says, does he know things? Can he see things happen before they do? And she says yes. She doesn't quite, she's not even hesitant. She goes, yes, he does. And I think that he probably was having Force visions. And one of the things I think it would work so well is because it's the whole thing of self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It's the whole time he's told he's the chosen one and stuff like that, and all these other things, and he wants to be a Jedi, he wants to save all the slaves, he wants to do all these things, and it's just him causing his own problems. And I think that the dreams are a very big part of that, because obviously when he sees his mum dying in episode 2, he then goes off and murders like a whole tribe of sand people, and then when he sees Padme dying, he goes mental, and that's what caused him to basically be Vader. And I think it links well both with the imagery of the dreams, what caused him, but also in a literal sense. I can only remember probably 5 bad dreams I had before the age of 20. I used to have a dream journal because I had nightmares for quite a while, lots of weird dreams. So I started writing them down. It basically, when you write them down, it stops having nightmares a lot of the time. And I in my head canon, I like to think he did have that exact vision of sort of, you see, she say, I was only a dream and things. And then it turns, you see him sort of walking and seeing all the fire and whatever. I like to think that, yeah, he does have that dream, but because it was so long ago, he just thinks, oh, that's just a that's just a
A
bad dream.
conflation of memory and dream and other things.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
for him, when he was young, it's probably like, yeah, I had this bad dream and it was just a bad dream. But obviously, for all we know, I mean, I could have had when I was 10, I could have had a dream of my own death, but I've had several dreams of me potentially dying. What makes that one the one that sticks out? And I think that works really well. So I'd say for me, yes, that I would agree that is. And it works on so many levels. You say like the shot, which is the poster of him standing there and you see Vader's shadow. That never happens in the film because that just doesn't happen in the film. It's not possible.
Yeah.
But when you see that, I just think it's one of the things I love about Charles Soule is, like, as you said, the whole stupid sand thing. He knows all and it's kind of what I do, I think. I mean, Charles Soule, I'd like to compare myself to my favorite author, of course. I think that what he does is what I do, is every kind of bit in Star Wars that's jarring or a bit crap or a bit annoying, I try less so to go, that's a fault with the filmmaking. And I try to go, that just happened in universe. Sometimes people say stupid things. Sometimes people act like twats. Sometimes you have a conversation and you just say the completely wrong word and it comes out and it's just opposite what you want to say. But in films, you don't get that, because in films, everyone seems to say exactly perfectly what they say all the time.
Yeah.
And they watch Rick and Morty and they mess up a bit, which is good. But yeah, I think Charles Soule, he knows some of the silliness. He knows some of that stuff and he plays on it. And in the current run of Star Wars, so the second run of Star Wars, which is set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Charles Soule is now writing that. And there's a bit where Luke Skywalker, he is going through loads of stuff. I can't remember the details, but he basically is going through loads of different terrains and stuff. And he lands, and there's one point he lands on sand. And he puts his hands through the sand. He goes, sand, I'm so happy to see you. You know, I love sand. And it's just that, and that's just funny because obviously it's such a,
Yeah.
that you love or hate sand is such a weird thing to say. But the funny thing is, obviously, because in canon, it's already been said that
It's
his
got that
dad said he hated it.
connectivity. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I like. I like the fact that, yeah, there's some stupid shit in Star Wars, doesn't make sense, but you can kind of subtly point and laugh at it without ruining or trying to take away from the creators of that original content, but adding to the thing you're reading at the moment, being like, yeah, that was a bit silly, wasn't it? Have a little laugh about it and move on. So, love it.
Little in jokes. We all have a good in joke. Yes. So I think we'll wrap up there on that.
Yeah.
But that's the 3 cracking comics. And I will say, I've read bits and pieces. When Marvel first started doing the Star Wars, I started to read them, and I've read bits and pieces. I've now read the Kieran Gillen run. I'm definitely going to read the Charles Soule run, and I will try some more. So yeah, thank you for introducing me to those books. So that's really cool. But yeah, I've been really impressed. They really are good. One thing I will say is, they've taken Vader and they've done with Vader what they wanted to do with other villains. Like DC clearly wants to do this with the Joker. Like, they can't seem to stop writing about that bleeder at the moment. It's getting on my nerves. Like, he's in everything.
And he's going to be a Snyder Cut as well for no reason.
Yeah, he's got his own comic at the moment, which it makes no sense. I'm sure it's terrible, but there are villains that, they do it a little bit. Like they did it marginally with like Mr. Freeze, and they've done other stuff. Like, Poison Ivy's now got a bit more of this sort of thing. But there's very few villains that you can give, as you said, this sort of like transition, or almost like Breaking Bad. Like, this is you can't do this with many villains. And I think they've done it. It could have been an absolute steaming pile. This could have been a car wreck. It could have been clumsy and it could have been cliched, and but they really seem to have handled this with some of the best writers and artists as well. So well done to Marvel for handling this in such a way. So well done for that. It's excellent. So anyway, any final thoughts then on the comics that you've seen? Anything you want to sort of throw in just before we wrap up?
I would say to people, which I try to tell everyone when it comes to Star Wars comics, because I've read basically all of them. And so I like to think I have a pretty good idea. There's no bad ones, but there are plenty of okay ones. Like I'd probably say the majority of Star Wars comics are okay. That's unfortunately the truth. And the main run of Star Wars comics, there's a couple of excellent arcs. There's a Rogue One arc, which is the sequel to Rogue One. And they go, the Han, Leia, and Luke and stuff, they go to Jeddah, and it's really cool. The artwork's pretty good. It's very interesting. But really, the main run of Star Wars is not where you want to be, if I'm being honest. I always say to people, read the Darth Vader comics. Read this run of Charles Soule, 2017. It's called Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. 25 issues. They're all excellent. They link to Star Wars Rebels, the Inquisitors. You get to see a couple of Jedi that survived Order 66 and then come into contact with Vader. And then after that, read the Jason Aaron Darth Vader run. It's about 20 issues, I think, and introduces Aphra, which is quite cool. And then read the third run, which is ongoing at the moment, which is Greg Rucka's ones. I'd say the Darth Vader comics are the quintessential Star Wars comics. If you read them and you absolutely love them and you need more, then you can read the other ones because he pops up in the main run of Star Wars and things like that. But really, if you read, I'm not saying everyone has to read all of the Darth Vader comics, but if you read all the Darth Vader comics and you don't like them, I can almost guarantee you will not like the rest of the Star Wars comics because they're just the best ones, bluntly. As soon as the new Vader comic comes in the post, like normally I try and, when new Star Wars comics come, I try and wait for the arc to finish and I can read the whole arc in one go, because waiting a month at a time to read 30 pages drives me mental. Can't do it that with Darth Vader. As soon as the Darth Vader comic comes in, I'm reading it that moment because they're that good. And even now, where it's showing him between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, it's showing that turn of his back to the light so well. And the only other thing I'd say is that the only comic I'd say that really comes close to this is the Rise of Kylo Ren miniseries. 4 comics. It's set for, you get some flashbacks of Ben Solo when he was with Luke when he was really young, when he was like 10. It gives origin story of the Knights of Ren. It shows the bleeding of the lightsaber crystal, and it gives more context to what happened at the Jedi Temple as well. And I think, once again, these things should have been answered in the sequel trilogy. Yeah. They weren't, but Charles Soule, he's the one who wrote the Rise of Kylo Ren. Charles Soule did them, and I just think that he's the one to watch. He's written the High Republic book, Light of the Jedi, that I did a review of recently. It's amazing, and I just think he is going to be, I'm saying this as a betting man, 10 years, maybe 20. If he continues on the same trajectory, he's going to be seen as the Neil Gaiman of Star Wars, because I think if he can write a screenplay or have any hand in any sort of series, it will be absolutely top tier. So aside from that, I'm happy to go ahead. Sorry,
I should say, if you like what Charles Soule is doing, go check out. If you go check some of his other comics out.
He's done Daredevil and Wolverine, I think.
He's done Daredevil. He did an amazing Swamp Thing. And
he's touched Swamp Thing. That's I didn't know that. Funnily enough,
he followed Scott Snyder's run on the New 52, and so the New 52 was a bit of a mess, but there were things that stood out. And Scott Snyder, Jeff Lemire had a parallel run on Animal Man and Swamp Thing, and then Charles Soule followed up, and it was really good. But he's done some fantastic stuff. So I do recommend checking some of those out as well.
Wonderful.
But plug away. So where else can people find you anyway? Where else can they sort of listen to you chattering away?
So my flagship podcast is Genuine Chits Chat. You can find me on social media at Genuine Chits Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. I've had Scott on the show. We were going to talk about H.P. Lovecraft, and they got sidetracked by sci-fi stuff for 2 hours. And so at some point in the next probably few weeks or months, we'll have you on again, and we'll try and talk about H.P. Lovecraft this time. So on Genuine Chit Chat, different guests every episode I've had. Bands, Millie Mans in the Shut Up, Iron Man, Shaudo, musical artists. I've had filmmakers, I've had other podcasters. I interviewed Claudia Gray. I've got some other people involved with some people who've been in Star Wars, some people who create Star Wars content like I do, people who are authors. In the next couple months, all of them will be on the show as well. So Claudia Gray was the big one that I had on my show late last year. And then if you don't want a nice big variety and you only want me talking about Star Wars, then I've got a show on Comics in Motion. The show is called Star Wars Comics in Canon. New episodes come out every Saturday on Spotify and all the usual podcast places. It's on the feed of Comics in Motion, and if you want to just listen on YouTube, it is on the feed on my channel Genuine Chit Chat. So if you follow me on social media at Genuine Chit Chat, I post snippets of the conversations I have each week. I post photos of the comics that I tackle on Star Wars Comics in Canon, and as well as all the guest spots I generally do, I'll make individual posts about those too. So Star Wars conversations like this, some of them are nerdy, some of them are not. That's Genuine Chit Chat. And every conversation I have that is heavily to do with Star Wars, I put on the feed of Star Wars Comics in Canon as well. So Star Wars junkie, check out my Star Wars podcast. If you're not, Genuine Chit Chat. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me on, Scott. It's always a delight to be on 20th Century Geek.
It's always good to have you. And ever since we did Batman, I always wanted to do the Desert Comics, Desert Island Comics. This has been absolutely fantastic. So, and you say, actually, if you just like good audio entertainment, check out both. I think, Genuine Chit Chat and Star Wars Comics in Canon are both fantastic. I've learned a lot from Star Wars Comics in Canon. There's a couple I've held back on because I know I want to read certain things. So I'm like, oh, no, I'll get to that at a later date. But wonderful. I highly recommend both podcasts. And all the stuff that's coming out of comics, the Comics in Motion Network. They're doing God's work.
Different show basically every day of the week, and you and I have been on that. You're like I call Genuine Chit Chat and 20th Century Geek like the cousins of the Comics in Motion family, because like we just appear. Obviously I've got my own show on there as well, which does help, but like we did Comics on Trial together where I defended Phantom Menace, and we've done like lots. You've been on Comics on Trial as well since before, and I have as well on different parts, and it's just like a nice big collaborative family. So if people just go check it out. You've got Mandatory Marvel and DC, What's the Topic, Indie Comic Spotlight, basically every perspective of comics you could possibly want, whether it's discussing them from different eras or whatever. We've got you covered. Go check out Comics in Motion.
Seriously, some of the best stuff. All right, but anyway, so for 20th Century Geek, as we wrap up, if you want to come in contact with us, you can find me at 20th Century Geek on all the social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, the works. Just look for 20th Century Geek. Or if you want to email me directly, it's 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. There's 20thcenturygeek.com where all the episodes are. There's blogs, reviews, and other things on there. And we've got a Patreon, and we do a couple of things on there. We do a monthly podcast where it's me garbling on for 30 minutes in my 30-minute thoughts for a subject chosen by my patrons. We've done all kinds of things on there. And this month we are talking about Fawlty Towers and the sort of decline of the middle class in the 70s in sitcoms. That's what it's going to be about, because that's what's in my head.
I do love Fawlty Towers.
Oh yeah.
It's cracking.
I've got all these ideas in my head that are going to come out for 30 minutes at some point in the next day or two. Anyway, and the other thing is I do a creator corner. I had Kieran Gillen on to talk about Once and Future, but I did have some Darth Vader conversation off air. And recently I spoke to Richard McLean Smith about the podcast Unexplained. So more of that. So go check out our Patreon. That's Patreon 20CG Pod. And you'll find all different things on the tiers on there. But other than that, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you all, and we shall see you in the next episode.